Welcome back to the Smartbuild implementation series. This is part 5, trim. So for the first part of this session, we want to do a quick review of the trim settings here on the right. And one question that comes up, or several questions that comes up during a training process is, well, what are all these terms that you guys are using, the Smartbuild terms, and the question is, can I change these terms? Or the names of these settings. And one thing with our support team, just to keep everyone on the same page, we do not allow you to change terms like ridgecap. So these are all defined by the settings on the back end. So you can't change these names here. So one thing that I want to help you do is help understand what these parts all are. So we'll just start here at the top and pretty quickly go through these settings. So ridge cap, not much confusion there. We have a ridge at the peak. We do have a hip cap, which would be the next setting here. And a hip cap would be at an outside porch, so anything at an angle. You can set a different trim for the hip cap. And if you notice, we also have color settings here. So with these settings here, you can define whether or not this cap matches the wall or the roof or by default. And these settings can be saved. Also with the links. So you can set, if you're using a random link trim or a part link trim, you can say every time my hip cap is calculated in a job, it always uses 10 feet. You could have that pre-filled out there. So yeah, we'll keep moving here. Valley trim, self-explanatory there. So you can see right here where these two roofs meet, we're getting a valley trim. Gambrel transition trim, we don't have any in this project. Now, if this was a gambrel style roof with a pitch and then a pitch break going to a steeper roof, we would use a gambrel. And then the next trim here, the western, is when we do the opposite. So if we're doing a steeper pitch and then we're flattening out, that's where we would use the western transition. The common term for that is maybe pitch break. So eave edge trim, that is just at the bottom of an eave. So whether there's an overhang or not, Smartbuild will calculate an eave edge trim. Gable edge trim, we're looking at the end of this gable. So again, whether there's an overhang or not, this is going to be your gable rake or your outside corner. That's a common term for it. And the angled edge trim, so we don't have any in this project, but if I would add a barn peak on this or a crow's beak, there's several terms for that, where we do an angled barn peak going out here at the top of the gable, and we need an angled edge. So as the roof terminates on the bottom edge of it, that's what you would use, angled edge trim. So I just have mine set to match the gable edge trim. High side trim on this project here, I did extend this porch out so we could get a high side trim view. So anytime there's a shed roof terminating, and a common trim there would be something like a half ridge, half corner trim. Some people use that. So here where this porch, shed porch is. And then we have a gable flashing and a shed flashing. So when it comes to gable flashing and shed flashing, these two are easily confused in the software. And if you think of a gable roof coming out from the side of a building here, an attached building, so this would be a gable flashing. A gable flashing, sometimes called a sidewall flashing in the industry. And then a shed flashing would be very similar, except it's a shed coming off of the side of a building. So an end wall flashing is normally the common term there. Moving on into fascia and soffit. When we look, I'll tilt this building up here a bit so we can get a better look at the fascia. So we have eave fascia and gable fascia material. So here where I have a rake corner, I have the bottom edge, I have a fascia here on the gable, and on the eave, the same thing. So we have an eave at the bottom, eave edge, fascia, and the gable. And they can be different sizes, and then you can have them to match the roof color or the wall color, different colors too. And when we look at trim, so the soffit styles, I have this set to be a panel, as in it's cutting it like it is the sidewall. So it's cutting like a 12-inch panel. We also have a box style soffit where it could be a one-piece trim. So I'm not using eave soffit box and gable soffit box in this model. So the soffit material, not really a trim item. In this case, it's a panel in sheeting, something I set up in sheeting. And then you can also have a margin. So moving into wall trim, we have a base trim, which is at the bottom of the wall. The common term for that would be a rat guard, or in this case, where I'm using a stone or a siding product, it may be like a siding starter, depends on the product. Top of wall trim, So this is self-explanatory. So it's the F and J trim maybe at the top of your wall. And if you use two trims there for like a vinyl product, we do have the ability to set up an assembly. So this top of wall could be two trims. So it may be a combination, maybe an F and J or an F and J combo or whatever your trim is. Wainscot trim, basically the trim that splits here where this stone and siding meet. And again, if you needed to have two trims there, that's where the assembly process comes up. And we'll have a series video on just setting up assemblies. Exterior corner trim. The first setting you notice you can cut the corner at the wainscot. So if you're doing stone and you don't really need a corner down here, you could do that and then set the wainscot corner to none as I'm showing here. So back to the outside corner, maybe similar to your gable rake here, just an outside corner, 90-degree corner trim. And in the inside corner, self-explanatory there. I think I have one in this project here where this porch bumps out. So on the inside corner here, inside corner trim. And then moving on down, so we have the wainscot, inside and outside also. And then open wall trim. So open wall, and you have a setting of where that open wall trim starts. And I have mine set to be a beam wrap. So beam wrap is, at the making of this video, beam wrap is not fully supported, something we hope to do soon. But I'm just using an open wall base trim, and I'm using it as a beam wrap. So your open wall base could be anytime you toggle this wall open, it puts a J channel at the bottom of this wall sheeting. And open wall base trim, so we have colors there. And then you have the same thing for interior trims. So when you toggle a wall open, if it has liner on the inside, you would get interior open wall base. So we have ceiling liner, skipping on down here, finding some more trims. So we have roof trims. So we went through the roof trims already. So we went through the wall trims, liner trims. So interiors, a lot of these are the same where we're doing an interior base, interior wainscot. So it's just the inside there, and then the interior corner trims. So those are all self-explanatory. And then ceiling trims, these can be a little bit confusing also, where the ceiling pitch break. So if you're doing a scissor truss inside the building where there's a pitch, and I think I have one here, if we can zoom in here and look at this. So interior pitch break, where there's two different trims or two different pitches meeting, you could have something there. And then eave ceiling to wall, that would be along the eave wall. So I have my ceiling up here at the top, and then gable ceiling to wall would be on the end of the panel, the end of the ceiling panel. And then we also have trim margins. So we have 5 different trims here that you can set a margin to. And we've added these along the way. Just it's common that the user or the person doing the takeoff may want to add a margin or add an extra 6 inches to the way that Smartbuild is calculating these trim lengths. So that's what these settings here do. And then you can also add entire trim parts. So in Smartbuild, we don't really have a waste factor that you can apply a 5% waste factor. We do a little bit differently, where you can say, well, I always want to include an extra piece of base trim or an extra piece of door trim or whatever that may be. So skipping on over into the door and window tabs, walk door trims. So the header, if you're doing an entry door, the header trim would be just going across the top, maybe a J channel. And then the trimmer would be going down both sides. So we have two trimmers. Top jamb would be if you're framing that opening out, maybe doing a fascia on the opening, on the jamb part of it. And then the side jambs, the same case, down both sides of the door within the frame. So I have mine set to none. And then the inside, this just repeats the same case for the interior trimmer, interior header. Skipping on ahead to overhead door trim, we have similar settings. We have a header and we have a trimmer, and I'm using a one-piece trim. I call it overhead door trim. Yours may be a two-piece. And again, if you're doing two-piece, we have a couple of different options. You could set this trimmer up as an assembly item, which we'll talk about in the assemblies video, or you could use the top jamb and side jamb as a second part. In my setup here, I'm using the top jamb and side jamb to get my weather stripping. You could have your weather stripping cost in with the door cost, but this is just another way to do it. So we have 3 different settings here. We have header and trimmer, the top jamb and side jamb. So two settings there, and then one on the inside, interior header and interior trimmer. So plenty different configurations that you may use to get all the trims you need. So skipping on to sliding door trims, I do not have a sliding door in this particular project. We can do a separate sliding door review just for sliding doors because they have a lot more parts and we're actually building those doors in the model. So we're skipping over the sliding door for this section. At the sliding door panel trim. So getting on to window trims. So we have a window header, in this case across the top. We have the window trimmer. This is down both sides. And then have a window seal, which is at the bottom. And then if you are framing a window opening out with trim where it's recessed back and you need that jamb and the side jamb, the top jamb, you can do that. So that would be another place to add trim around an opening. So that is the first part. That wraps up the first part here, just in identifying the trims in the model. And then for part two, we'll jump over into the setup wizard and start setting up your actual trims. So for this part of the session, we will need to go to settings at the top, go to setup wizard, and then the trim tab. And if you notice, if you're using the generic database, or if this is the database you have to start with, and you just signed up with Smartbuild and this is what your database looks like, or if you're kind of coming back and you've had your account for a while and you need to do a setup or a redo, if you want to start out with this base group of trims, we'd be glad to email you this file and get you set up, or you can just upload this file and start with these default trims. So when you look at these trims, this database is in a state where, like we always like to say, it's in a prime state for you to take it over. Because if you look at any one of these trims that we have in here, like an F channel, it's ready for you to assign your systems that you defined, and it's ready for you to assign the usages. So in the biggest thing to understand here with these trims here, this database has already been transitioned to use assembly. So think of it as we need to set up our library of trims, and then the part two process of trims will come later in assemblies where we're actually creating this group of items that work together to make your material list 100% accurate. So we know when we look at this model here, we're applying trim to all the trim lines. So the question is, what about all those fasteners or closure material or caulking or any accessories that are going with that trim? So that's where assemblies come in. So our first step has to be to create those base materials or the primary materials that live in those assemblies. So when I look at an example like J channel, very common trim, common term. So when we look at J channel and we have our SKU, we have the description, we have the size it is in the model, whether we're overlapping it or not, how we sell it, our selling units. We need to put it in a system. Here's everywhere that it can be used. And then here's the links that it's available in. So in this case, I'm using a part length of 10. If I want to add a part length, I could click add and type in 12 here. So I can easily add part lengths, and then I can set my prices here, or we can do the pricing later in a pricing upload. So that's really quickly, how you would build a trim out and add your links. But then the question is, well, what about all the items that go with it? Like every time I use it in a job and the fastener or the small trim nail that I want to nail it with, or a screw that I'm fastening it to around the window. And that comes down to trim assembly. So again, we have to create the trim itself. And then when we get to the trim assembly part, you can see we've got an assembly for J channel. And that J trim is the primary product. Again, we would want to make sure it's set up in our system. And then here's where it can be used. So in this case, I'm doing something with a lineal foot. In most cases, it would just be the trim and then a nail. So we have a siding nail coming in here. And when you look at this, how this is set up, it's so much per lineal foot, 1/2 per lineal foot. So again, that'll be covered in the assembly session, but we just want to give you a preview of what we're doing and then how that plays into that next part. So the trim itself, when you want to add a new trim, you can click the plus sign, type in your trim, give it a description, fill that out, put in your width and the height. Now, if you're not sure what these would be, that kind of plays into, well, if you look at our example trims that we have here, and because this is the way that it's displayed in the model according to the way we interpret the usage. So depending on the usage, that drives how this is interpreted in the model. If I would set this to be an outside corner trim, it would automatically display it to be a 90 degree trim going maybe 6 inches both ways. So that's just how software interprets those dimensions. So we can set up trims as a part length, and this may be, like you said, it may be 8, 10, 12, and all these different part lengths, or we can turn part lengths off and just price it in a lineal foot. So if we turn part lengths off, very easy to do, just toggle the part lengths button off, put in your price per lineal feet, and then you can also turn colors on. So again, after you assign a system to a trim, then it's as simple as toggling colors, and it automatically knows what colors are part of that system. So as soon as you toggle this on and off, it automatically populates the colors for you based off of what system it's been made part of. So that's just creating a new trim. Again, it may be much easier just to work through here and find, okay, yeah, you have a door track. Maybe yours is Cannonball and you want to name it Cannonball door track or some other brand. And the SKU is different. Maybe it's a different SKU. Or if your SKU is a numbered based system, it may be something where we need to use a vendor SKU. So that the part number for an 8-foot length may be 654321 or whatever that is. And then 10 feet may be another number. So you can fill these in here and just leave this SKU the way that it is. If you can use this SKU, or if your system works with a lineal foot within it, so each time this lineal foot part gets replaced by the length. So this SKU here on the job in the material order would be DOORTR, and then it would fill it in with the number 8 or 10 or 12, depending on the length. So again, that's how the LF SKUs work. And if you turn part lengths off, then this LF would disappear. So we would lose, and I can do this really quickly, just toggle part lengths off and get rid of this LF. So now I have one trim part and it's door track and it's priced per lineal foot at $4.34 per foot. So you have two different ways that you can set up trims. We have part length and we have random length. If you use part length or if you use random length, that affects how you assign that trim in a job. So like we saw earlier, you have these overrides for all these different trims. And if you're using a random length trim, like a J channel at a random length price, and you don't want to cut it at all these odd lengths like 3 foot and 4 foot, depending on what it's trimming around, you could put in an override and it always cuts it at 10 feet and then tries to use the waist up as it can throughout the project. So that's how that works. And if you do use a part length trim, like if your trims are 10, 12, 14, or like 10 foot 2, if you're using a part length, keep in mind these overrides have to match exactly. So if your trim is 10.33, you would have to type it in exactly like this, or you would get a red price saying I can't find that trim length in your catalog. So that's the thing to know if you're setting up part length trims or random length trims, how they may be a little bit different on how it behaves in the job. So again, you're welcome to delete any trims that you see here. These are really commonly used in the industry, and it may be much quicker just to, instead of you can download this list, work in Excel, and re-upload it. If you do that, keep in mind if you change a SKU and you try to re-upload this file, it will not recognize it. It looks at it as a new SKU. So you can't change SKUs on an upload, but you can delete this entire list and re-upload this new file with your new SKUs if you want to do that. So that's completely fine to do that also. So whatever works for you, and we can help you on the Excel download uploads if you need. If you reach out to support, or your training person that's helping you on your implementation can also help on that. So you're welcome to work in Excel, but in a lot of cases, it may be just as easy to walk through here and just fill these in. And if you are able to go through the setup process just by changing the names and the SKUs here, then when we get to the assemblies part and actually setting up that section of the database, then it's as simple as you may just have to reselect the primary material and then reselect the nail. And again, these examples are just in here to give you an idea of how they get set up and how some people use them. So back to the product systems again and how they relate to trims. So if I was using like this project here that I have, where I have a stone wainscot and I have a board and batten siding, the trim that I'm setting up for this area or this assembly, it would need to live in the stone product system and in the board and batten. So it would have to be a trim for both cases. And where these two lines meet, then it allows Smartbuild, when I set my product systems in this job, it allows Smartbuild to choose that trim. So if I want to set up that trim in that system, I can do it here. So when I add the trim, no matter what the trim is, I can choose that system and say it's part of that system. It gets used in those cases. And in this case, like I mentioned, the board and batten, if it's a stone trim, I would need to set that to automatically be chosen for both systems. So if I find my stone trim here, I'll just choose a rat guard trim. It's a good example. I would need to put it in my board and batten system and in my stone system. And if I put it in both of those and then have it set as a correct usage, it can be used when I filter out my product system. So if I go to the main building tab here, and if I set my product systems, let's say I had a board and batten and I had a stone for the wainscot, like I do here, it would automatically choose the common trim in that system. So when you set your trims up, get all of them in here, you're like, okay, I'm done. I have everything in here. If you want to fine tune your systems, maybe easier to go to settings and product systems menu to manage those. So anything that you do on that side, sometimes it's a little bit easier to work through that menu on the product system. So it'll take this a little bit to load here, but when we open up and edit this product system, so it defaults to be on trim. You can also edit your sheeting product. So when I'm on trim here, so these are all the places that this usage can be, that this system can be used. And then, so I'm the ag panel system is what we're working with here. And I could select any of these trims and add them to be used to that in that system, or when that system or that class of trim is being applied on the model. And one thing that some people may overlook or sometimes can get confusing is things like door track, sliding door track, even though they are maybe used primarily in an ag panel system. If you do board and batten on a wall, you automatically have to have all your sliding door trims in that system also, because it looks at the system on the wall. So if this were a sliding door, it looks at this system on this wall and says, okay, this is the board and batten system. I can only use board and batten trims. And when I do that, I want to make sure that I have all my sliding door trims, whether they are, quick frame products, door track, square track, the round track, or things like track cover. They would all need to live in the board and batten, just along with any other siding. So if you're using vinyl siding and you ever do sliding door trims, you would need to have those in there too, even though they may be a metal product. So that's one thing to know if you're doing sliding doors. But we'll have a separate session on just sliding doors in themselves, since there's so much to sliding doors. So that about wraps up what we need to cover in the setup wizard and the product systems menu. So again, you find this in settings and in trim, and when you get done working through adding all your trims, we can help you upload them if you already have a parts number system, or it may be easier just to use ours and change the name, change the part number, and work through it that way. Because again, if you remember how that process works, anytime you set the system and toggle the colors, it populates all those trims for you. So you can easily manage several trims, up to 30 or 40, depending on how many colors you have, in a single clicking process here. So it's really easy to set up the trims in this UI that we have. And again, if you have any questions, we'll be here to help you. And that wraps up the trim session, and we look forward to our next video.